Good day and welcome back to the Center for Faculty Excellence. We're on the Faculty Pride podcast, and I am here with my new friend, LeGuyader. He's in the College of Business, teaches economics specifically. So
Accounting, actually.
Accounting. I knew you were an accountant,
Yes.
but today we're talking about sustainable economics, right? Sort of.
As broadly as we can. It's not just about accounting, right? Accounting is just one element of it, of course.
Awesome. Thank you for correcting me on that
No
because I
correction.
know that you're an accountant, and we've talked about that before on the show. But
It's my colleague Scott who you speak with, who's
Yes.
the economist.
He
right?
is. Thank you. Which can already explain how much I know about sustainable economics already and sustainability in lots of areas, which is what you're going to talk about today, right?
Yes, I bet that you know a lot about sustainability. Sustainability is a new label or tag that
I have solar panels.
Well, there you are. So you're a participant in a sustainable economic movement.
Okay.
And
Good.
and your home ecosystem, I presume on your home you have solar panels?
Yes, I do.
Many people who are in favor of that as a solution to improving the environment would say that you're already a greenie and you're doing great.
Awesome.
Yes, so the point to be made is sustainability is the new label. It's the hot topic, and it's like a tent. It's designed to be very broad because I bet if we had enough time and we went through your entire life experience, you either are aware of or you're participating in many other things other than solar panels that we now put under the sustainability tag.
For sure.
Right, and so using the label sustainability in economics or governance or whatever discipline you want to call up is just a way to organize the thinking, and therefore it has spawned a movement, the sustainability movement, which is more or less embodied in the United Nations sustainability goals. And if you walk around campus and you find that the College of Business is going through its AACSB accreditation, you will find that one of the standards we must address now asks us to state what we are doing with respect to the 17 UN sustainability goals. And we actually have created a report that Dean Lopez is providing to the AACSB about what we're doing there. We have our first sustainability course. We've had faculty research presentations on sustainability this fall semester already. So we're digging in and we're trying to do our part on sustainability. And as part of our efforts at the College of Business, we're helping define the debate because it's a relatively new field. So it's very malleable. And where it's going to go, I think many people who are in favor of sustainability would say, well, this is going to be a new way of organizing how we act. It might even be a new philosophy, but there are some other people, including some of our economics professors at the College of Business, who believe that some of the aspects of sustainability are not in fact economically viable. They are themselves not sustainable. They will fail. And
Okay.
and that is a live debate that exists in the real world across many countries, nationalities, civilizations. This is not a unanimous decision where everybody stands up. It's also a complex discussion. One of the people who works with me looked at one of my presentations once where I was going to focus on some disadvantages of the current modern sustainability movement, and they said, well, who wouldn't be in favor of sustainability? And so I took that person's question and I flipped it to my students in the sustainability reporting course we have at the College of Business and Elective in the accounting department. And I said, do you realize that when you ask everybody to drive electric vehicles, that you are not necessarily fully answering or providing a sustainable solution, because you've got to tell me where the electricity comes from to power the batteries. And if you're using an oil-fired or coal-fired utility plant to do that, your entire solution, depending upon how big a sustainability tent you want, actually isn't perfectly sustainable. In fact, it may be less sustainable than what we're dealing with now.
If not simply a wash.
A wash would be good. Sometimes efforts at sustainability actually, if you, depending upon how you measure things and how broad you cast your net, are in fact disadvantageous. They're not sustainable. They will bring an economy to a halt, for example, which means that you may clean up the environment, but you may hurt society in the bargain.
Right.
Right?
And you go back to all the way to the solar panel situation. You're already making me think through these things, and what is sustainability, right? And
Right.
you're right on this huge, broad application because, yes, I've had solar panels now for probably 10 or 12 years on my house. Love them. Yes, they bring the price of my electricity down. But
Okay.
unfortunately, the common misconception for people who don't have solar panels is that I still have electricity if the electricity goes out.
Sure.
Not so. Right now, I'm starting to look into that though, because there have now been these backup batteries that you can plug your systems into.
Right. To store the power.
And
right.
then you can also use them, which is very cool for me. This is why we're really looking into it, myself and my husband, because you can also use them on regular days where at night you're having to pull from the grid, right, again,
Right.
because you have no sun.
If you can store it, you can use it
Right.
at night. Right.
If I can store it, I can use it at night, making existing sustainable ideas more sustainable, right? So
Exactly. And sustainability, if we want to make it achievable for everybody to understand it more easily, sustainability is very close to the dictionary definition of it. How long will something last?
right,
When I say that something is not sustainable, it means something around the process or the state of mind or whatever will end. Sustainability also means you're responsible for what amounts to be the three major subtopics of sustainability, and to not participate in that is to you don't get the label of responsible. So you can be a responsible person, a responsible corporation, but a lot of people don't like these tags because if you're not a responsible corporation, are you an irresponsible corporation? No, that tag hasn't been adopted yet, but you see, you either are or are not in the responsible corporation silo. The sustainability is the same as what some sophisticated people prefer to call ESG. E means environment, S means society, G means governance, how we organize and manage ourselves. So interchangeably, sustainability is ESG. And then what is happening is that many topics that you would have been very familiar with, or in fact very engaged with, very passionate about, are now being brought into the sustainability tent, but they're always organized, so far at least, under these three broad headings: environment, society, and governance.
All right, I want to first kind of dissect those three different areas and give some examples of each
Yes.
of those. We've kind of talked through environment a little bit already with the electric cars, solar panels, and things like that. Talk to me about society and governance. But then on the other side of that, I'd love to talk about like watering down sustainability and applying it in such a broad scope. Does that make it less important in these three areas?
I think it may potentially make it more difficult, but also more exciting. When the United Nations adopted they adopted the responsibility voluntarily after a 2015 meeting, so for them it's relatively new. But if you think in terms of American corporations, sustainability reports for American corporations are as old as the first sustainability report issued by Ford Motor Company, which Bill Clay Ford, the executive chairman of Ford, takes credit for creating because he thought it would be a good idea. And every year the report gets bigger and includes more topics. To your thought, I want to first say, as an introductory thing, that if you educate yourself by going to the United Nations website and reading about their 7 sustainability goals, the organizing principles around this, you'll find a very interesting statement that says, please join us, please help us adopt values to make mankind as a whole improve. And every time I read that, I always ask, whose values? And how do you define mankind? It can be as simple as saying, is this an anti-capitalist system? Is this a pro-socialist philosophy? Will the first world, we're leaders of the first world, and the third world the poorer countries get along. It's not obvious to me at all, because the whole idea of the United Nations is it's a mosaic. And the whole idea of their sustainability drive at present is pictured in their wheel. It's like a wheel of fortune, but it has 17 tabs, all different colors, each on a different topic. 17 topics is a lot to keep straight.
For sure.
So I like.
And those are kind of what the
ESG is about, right? So
and what your accrediting body is checking to make sure you're
yes.
paying attention to.
At least for this is for College of Business and Accounting Program accreditation, we are specifically asked. It's semi-voluntary to state what actions we have taken and to group them along the 17 sustainability topics. And so there are syllabus topics that fall in that, so you can check the box on that. Or there are enrichment programs for the students, professional development programs for the faculty. We've done all those different kinds of things, and we've done different things across our departments, and different colleagues have taken different points of view on it, including the very valuable point of view, this doesn't make sense, and I'd like to have a talk about why this doesn't make sense. I want to listen to that story if I'm someone who is definitely on the sustainability bandwagon, and I think it's the only way to go. I want to hear the naysayers, because maybe I didn't think of everything, or maybe if there's money involved, I didn't price it right, or maybe just like having solar panels, you get your immediate positive sustainable effect, but it comes with some environmental cost, which maybe is not your direct responsibility. It's the responsibility of the solar panel manufacturer. Like the electric vehicle, you get a gold star for having an electric vehicle in the sustainability world, but the other day General Motors announced the second of its EV solutions. The first was the Chevrolet Volt. Now it has a sedan. And the executive vice president of GM, who announced this in Michigan, was asked a question by a member of the press, but isn't the electric vehicle plugged in to get charged? The answer, yes. Well, what power plants are being used to power the grid against which they're taking the power? And the answer was, we think, at least for our demonstration model, it's the municipal system that uses an oil-fired power plant. Well, there you get, instead of a gold star, you get a black dot, because the oil-fired power plant is using fossil fuels, and the sustainability movement would try to reduce the consumption of fossil fuel.
Right.
So,
and I feel, that's a very valid point. But then talk about the fuel emissions and things like that come from the car. So hopefully you're getting some balance there. Because I also say that with I have great solar panels, but I drive a beautiful SUV, so
well, there
I
you
guzzle.
Are. So
exactly.
But your solar panels, Elon Musk would love to have you as a client, because the fact that you have solar panels means that you have a built-in power source to eventually fuel up your Tesla. And I believe General Motors
Those
and
suckers
Ford
are expensive.
Well, now, isn't that another interesting point? Victor David Hanson is a renowned academic who's currently at the Hoover Institute in Stanford, California, and he has pointed out from personal experience as much as academic observation that the majority of people that he drives with on the highway every morning to the Stanford campus, there's a vast number of the cars are EVs, but the majority of those EVs appear to be driven by what we used to call yuppies, young urban professionals with really good jobs, right? And he says these are exactly, one, the people who can afford the solution, and two, exactly the people that we should not be giving government support, like energy credits, in order to buy that car. In other words, if you may have a solution that unit by unit works very well, but if it doesn't penetrate a target population, then in fact you don't have a robust solution. And that boils down to, can you afford it person by person? Can you afford the infrastructure, for example, to build the cars? Will you be able to afford the modifications to the grid so that there are adequate charging stations? It's not so much the EVs, it's Can you drive them across country? And the answer to that is, with some difficulty, yes.
The funny thing is, I forget everything. I forget my keys, where they are. I forget if I've unplugged my hair dryer in the morning. I have to go back and look and make sure that I've done all of these things so that my father calls me the absent-minded professor, right? And I told my husband, we were talking about the electronic cars. He said, "Here's the deal, Amber. I love you, but
It's
you're
good that
gonna
he started with
forget to plug that thing in. And while you're out and you go, I forgot to get gas yesterday, within 2 blocks, you're probably going to be able to get gas of pretty much wherever you go on a daily basis, unless we're driving cross country or something. You're going to be able to stop and get gas. Is there a thing that I can come plug you into and bring you home when you forget to plug your car in?"
Right. If you call AAA, as I remember my AAA card, if the reason you're calling them is you're running out of gas, they'll give you a gallon of gas so you can get to the nearest gas station. I don't know if with those big heavy trucks that could power half a town, whether they have the kind of energy port you can plug into your Chevrolet Volt or your Tesla to get it back. So I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know,
So for now, until there's a solution to the forgot to plug the car in, I'm not allowed to get one. And I don't.
I see.
I kind of understand this.
Well, how sad then. but he still loves you, which gets me to the answer to the question you asked a few minutes ago. Talk about the 3 parts of ESG, where ESG is the same as sustainability. And I'd like to do something really innovative. I'd like to talk about the last one first, because nobody ever gets to the last one. Governance. So governance, I think, in terms of organizing principles and also mechanics, so that we can monitor ourselves, because God knows the human being needs to be monitored. It's almost biblical. Or needs to be monitored, and we need rules. And governance can address corporations for the capitalists in the conversation, but also the way government is organized and the incentive structure that government has to pass the right laws and have reasonable regulations. We have a tension in the United States now where a judge has decided that the EPA has certain limits as to what it can do on environment. So their G, governance through the courts, is colliding with E, environmental action, and the courts have said, no, you're using, the EPA has been using its bureaucratic powers as a member of the executive branch of the federal government too broadly, and you must scale it back. Well, that's actually a very interesting ESG debate that's unfurling as we go along. Let me give you another example. So the ESG crowd wants to reduce fossil fuel consumption, decarbonization, net zero emissions, to help on the climate change problem, all related labels. But we have a governance issue, because we're not really sure whether we can adopt renewable alternative energy effectively. And the great panacea going back to the 50s and 60s was going to be nuclear power. But what we've now had in Europe is that France, the leading nuclear power country for electricity, has slowly turned off and decommissioned many of its power plants. And you have a breakdown in governance when you have war. Everybody would accept that. Governance breaks down in war. And the news from Europe last week was stunning in giving us a contrast. On the one hand, Russia is threatening a nuclear power plant that the Ukraine has. It's the largest power plant in the Ukraine. And if they destroy it, similar to the natural problem that happened at Chernobyl, they could spread radioactive waste across 1/3 of Europe easily. So people are asking Russia to please cease and desist some of their military actions. On the other hand, because of this special military operation in the Ukraine, Germany and Russia have broken their contract for Russian energy exports to Germany. And last week, at the same time as that war thing was going on in the Ukraine, Germany announced that instead of decommissioning their 3 nuclear power plants, they were going to keep it going. because that was a suitable alternative source of energy to the energy they were going to import from Russia. I imagine gas and things of that nature. Now that's interesting because many people would say, well, on the one hand, congratulations, nuclear power is a replacement for fossil fuel. But on the other hand, nuclear power is no longer the panacea, and that's a problem. Sometimes, because of governance issues, we get forced into a corner and we have no choice but. As I said, if it's not sustainable, which means it's going to end. We really don't want the German economy to end during the winter, and so it is a reasonable short-term response to give the German people power by keeping their nuclear power plants on. But some people in the sustainability movement are still going to criticize Germany for relying so heavily on nuclear power plants. In other words, sometimes there's no solution that's ideal for everybody. Everything boils down to a compromise.
And resources, for sure.
Yes. So G is for governance. How do we organize ourselves if we're going to look at corporations as an organizing principle? Does a corporation have a properly organized board? We would answer this by actually folding over into the S for ESG, because we want a board that includes outsiders, independent board members, and insiders, the management that's responsible. But we also want a diverse board. We certainly want enough women on the board. That's the new trend, by the way. It's been with us for at least 30 years, and I understand from a number of people that are motivated by that goal is not achieved. Well, so it's still a hot topic in the in the corporate boardroom. On the other hand, we want management to be ethical. And the first time I presented ESG, I think, related to our MBA program at the College of Business, somebody said, ESG is for ethics. And I had to say, no, it's not. Ethics is actually a subset of governance, where
I would have put it with society. So
well, and there you go. And yes, I agree with you. The interesting thing about filling the tent for sustainability or ESG, and also making it larger and larger and larger, is you get to propose your own topic to go into that tent. And
Sure.
then, as I've mentioned and as you pointed out, many of the topics really don't reside uniquely in one silo. They interact with the other silos. E, S, and G interact with each other. You would put ethics via society, but many people are comfortable in the corporate environment putting it in governance, because one of the most successful mechanics is codes of ethics, which sounds
I think
like
anybody would say that laws are developed from those ethics. So yeah, I mean governance may be the more natural thing.
Well,
anyway.
in the United States Congress, there's a beautiful mural in one of the meeting chambers, which is a facade that's supposed to be Moses, to remind the lawmakers that the rule of law in our society, the Judeo-Christian society, descends from the Ten Commandments, to which also the Islamic culture accepts, because it preceded the Prophet Muhammad. So, and I don't want to turn this at all into a discussion about religion, but don't you know that religion is a factor under S? We have to consider it.
Sure.
But code of ethics is very important, because code of ethics can be nearly a law, nearly a regulation. People do have to abide by code of ethics as we teach our students, right? And we have codes of ethics on campus. We have our academic integrity code, which is very important. So we're all in on ethics, whether you put it under G or put it under S, society. In fact, without our academic integrity code, I don't think that our students would have as well organized an academic experience, and they wouldn't be ready for the real world, because the real world functions with codes of ethics.
So society, let's hit that one
Society.
specifically.
Well, if I want to be traditional, old school about society, but I also want to recognize that I'm in a first world country where most labor is organized on a union basis in the northern industrial states, then the most prevalent topics for union-based labor are wages, health benefits or health coverage of some type, adequate education to do your job, and retirement benefits as part of your compensation. Those are the four major topics. Here are the other topics that easily reside in the education silo. Race, gender. How do you address someone? Should you ask the question, how do you address someone? I talked about diversity in the boardroom. Well, diversity in the boardroom on a traditional gender basis, man versus woman, but also race composition,
Sure.
right? Other topics would include things that might actually fold over into governance because they clearly are legal issues. Slavery. So there are some societies that still condone or use slavery or have working conditions that are tantamount to slavery. Human trafficking. It's so unfortunate, but the fact is that we are experiencing human trafficking in the United States on our southern border when drug cartel coyotes are organizing groups of people, forcing them to pay $10,000 a piece and more for the purpose of getting them to the Rio Grande and then telling them, your journey is done if you just swim across this river. And my job is done the second you put your toe in the water. But that's human trafficking. Right? And we've talked about things like cryptocurrency and that sort of thing. On the one hand, cryptocurrency is a facilitating device. It's a way to pay things. But on the other hand, it's a way to avoid society's rules. And cryptocurrency has been used in Silk Road transactions, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, that sort of thing. And so the misuse of cryptocurrency would, from my point of view, fall under both S and G. If I were a regulator and I was tasked with monitoring it, I would take that part of our cryptocurrency conversation and say it has a very, very big ESG sort of weight to it.
Right.
So other S topics, let me get back to one of the traditional topics that I think is very difficult to understand. And I'd like to make an important point. The point I'd like to make is that the way we might discuss things from the American point of view does not necessarily translate well across the world. And the way someone in, let's say, socialist-oriented France would discuss it does not translate well outside of France and into the United States. We do not have a common view, a common philosophy about things like wages. That makes the UN goal, let's bring mankind up by effectively imposing our values. I don't have an easy starting point because I don't necessarily have a uniform agreement as to which value system we're using or whether a uniform value system can be created. And for me, this is a critical topic, both as an individual and as an academic. But let's talk about wages. So in the United States, we have minimum wages. We have wages that are protected by union negotiation if you work in California or one of the northern Rust Belt industrial towns. You have wages by employer versus individual worker negotiation, for example, at the Mercedes and Volkswagen plants in the South here, free to work states, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the discussion about livable wage and all its characteristics. And I like to couch the question in a way that my students can understand it. My students are like me. They also go to McDonald's periodically to get a hit of small fries and a Coke. I get a Diet Coke to offset the small fries. But the question that always gets asked in these discussions is, if a person works 40 hours a week, a full work week, according to our cultural standards, flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, shouldn't they be paid enough to support their family? And then you realize, if you do the math, if you increase the hourly pay of a McDonald's worker with that responsibility to that level, that we won't be able to afford that McDonald's hamburgers as easily as we might. And so the debate is a very difficult debate to have. Should a person be able, at the age of 21, be able to flip hamburgers at McDonald's 40 hours a week and sustain themselves if they in fact put in those 40 hours? Many people say yes, other people say no. It's a stepping stone, and they'll evolve as they grow older and gain experience, maybe get that degree at Southeastern, to a higher level of wage and a better standard of living. That raises the final issue that the United States has started to confront. There is something called minimum income. There is a philosophy among some that if you look at a United States or any country in Europe, particularly the older countries, France, Germany, the UK that used to be part of Europe, that there is so much embedded wealth. Some of the wealth comes from the colonial era, all the gold that the Spanish crown continues to hold. There is so much embedded wealth, and it has been invested so well that there's surplus wealth, and so every person on reaching adulthood should be given a minimum amount of money every year. And the kind of monies I'm talking about for this, I've heard in the United States, well, at least $10,000 a year. So picture this, Amber, you're 18 years old, and you turn 18, and from then on you get $10,000 a year. My father would have called it walking around money, just for being here. We're so glad
Just
you're
for
here.
being a human.
Right. And people say that that is a fair share of the society's wealth. But then labor economists walk into the room, and they give the on the one hand and on the other hand arguments about all the disincentives that creates, while an educational economist comes in the room and says, well, then we have to factor that into the rate of tuition because the student is much more able to pay tuition, and maybe we should have a hotline to the governor that maybe TOPS doesn't have to do everything it was originally designed to do. And yet TOPS is not analogous to the so-called minimum wage.
Right.
So in my experience, traveling around the world literally, but also in my academic research, I found that the tendency to be willing to discuss minimum wage, livable, this kind of a wage, which is different than legal minimum wage in the United States, is far more accepted in a socialist economy, where everyone's supposed to share. That's the nature of socialism, right?
For sure.
So society, maybe you should ask questions, but, underlying governance, I think, is a heavy thread rule of law, which means you want to use the law or near law, things like codes of ethics, to accomplish certain purposes. Be careful on S. In S, we are clearly walking into what an academic would recognize as social engineering. Social engineering topics include, should everyone have a high school diploma? Well, that was the debate for my father's generation. I believe the debate, as I'm seeing it now for my children's generation, is a college degree a minimum necessary education, and do you have to add a master's degree to that so that you can get a viable job, right? So a social engineer would ask, well, how should we organize the educational agenda of society? There are some, I would label them as politicians, who would say education should be for free. So we're currently having a debate, and the social engineers really love this debate as to whether President Biden should forgive all student debt. And at least last night on TV, I heard a very, very good debate about, is it fair to forgive debt that's outstanding now, and what do we do for people who worked hard, maybe took on a second job and already paid it? Is it fair they get nothing? And my goodness, the people debating it did not agree at all. And I believe it's a very germane topic, because I believe as early as Wednesday is the date when the president would have to decide whether to continue the interest moratorium and the principal moratorium on student loans, which would affect our alumni body, right?
And we have an election coming up, so
yes,
there
by the
are
way.
just so many different factors.
Right. So I did say that I perceive a difference in how we approach the UN value system requirements. It's a precursor to everything we're doing, by asking, can we agree what our values are? Very clearly, to my point of view, and I don't think I'm saying anything controversial, If the measure is worldwide, no, we don't agree currently. And sometimes we get into conflicts over it. But then at the local level, by which, with respect to the globe, I mean the United States, politics always enters into the situation. If you want a law that's going to help you fill in your G silo in ESG, you can't escape politics. And if you want that law to be a compliance mechanism and also to have transgressions adjudicated, you have to bring it to the courts. And one of the big debates in the United States now is the degree to which our court system is becoming politicized, right? You can't escape politics. Politics is everywhere.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by again to share. You know, the next thing is I need to get you in here with an economist and let y'all kind of have some discussions about sustainability and how there's some differing opinions on that, right? So if y'all can have that very academic argument, that would be wonderful. I would love to get you in here
I'd
with
love
somebody.
to do that, but before we leave this, I just want to say that we did not spend our time together just talking about fossil fuel
Right.
and clean air and clean water, but I wanted to leave everyone with an acknowledgement that often, when we talk about sustainability, people rarely get beyond climate change
Right.
and greenhouse gases and things like that. And there's a whole lexicon there. If I brought in the law in G and social engineering in S, I got to bring in science in E, environment. You've got to know quite a lot of science to understand what people like Al Gore are talking about when they
Right.
talk about global warming. And there, with Al Gore, God bless him, we're bringing in politics again, right? So I just had to say that because most conversations about sustainability begin with and never get off of climate change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we definitely began with it, but we focused on the other topics as well.
Yes,
So
just to get
I
everybody.
do appreciate that
Yeah,
very
thank you for the
much.
chance to talk about
Broad.
it.
Sustainability is broad. So in and of itself, right? Sustainability across several applications.
And the agenda for sustainability, as I mentioned, but I'd like to say it again, is sustainability is a kind of tent.
Uh-huh.
They're trying to grow the tent. It's like the three-ring circus needs a bigger tent every year as the
We like
elephants
circuses
grow. Yes, I've noticed that.
at the Center for Faculty
Right,
Excellence.
and then if it's a three-ring circus, we got ESG, and every one of the rings has a very attractive act, and people like to go from the tigers to the elephants to the trampoline to the trapeze artists, etc. But this is where the door is open. Anybody can bring any topic into ESG, and maybe you'll get a trophy because your topic will rise to the top of the headline news, and maybe it won't. But it's whatever anyone wants to do, they should try their hand at it if they're interested in this. And that includes the economists you might bring into the room for our next discussion, who might argue none of this is relevant and we shouldn't be talking about this, and what a silly topic, because there are many economists who believe that.
Wow. All right. Again, thank you for joining us. I
Thank you.
appreciate you. We will
Thank-
see you again for sure.
Oh, good. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. I've been here talking to LeGuyader. He's in the College of Business here. He's an accountant in that area, teaches accounting, but also studies sustainability and its potential to kind of drive a lot of our decision making, both in the financial world as well as society and environment. So join us again for the Faculty Pride podcast. I'm Amber Narrow. Y'all have a great day.